Welcome once again, learners. My name is Mr. Pochilola. Welcome to lesson number 2 of experimental techniques. This happens to be Form 3 chemistry. I continue to wish my Form 4 students who are currently writing their exams, wishing you all the best, guys. I expect you to do very, very well. Having spent 2 years of learning, continue hustling, continue working hard, continue studying hard, revising hard, and don't forget to drink enough water to rehydrate your brain. Okay. Remember that the brain is 70% water, or your body is more than 70% water, and that your brain cells need to be fully hydrated in order to function. So don't deprive yourself of water, drink enough water. Wishing you all the best. So welcome to lesson number 2 of the topic experimental techniques. In lesson number 1, we looked at a component, a subtopic called chemical waste, in which we defined chemical waste and the examples of chemical waste that are generated in the chemistry lab, and the different ways of disposing the waste in a safe manner. So welcome to this component of the topic. This is called we shall be looking at what is called the designing a scientific investigation. Maybe it is necessary to define a scientific investigation. We are going to define a scientific investigation in the following manner. A scientific investigation is defined as simply the systematic process of finding out or finding an answer or a solution to a problem, okay, to a problem or observation, finding or trying to find an answer or a solution to a problem. This problem needs to be a scientific problem, right? So to every scientific problem, there must be a solution, right? So usually the process by which this is done is what is called the experimentation. So you carry out an experiment to find out, to find a solution or to find an answer to a particular question, okay, or problem, right? Okay, so that's called the scientific investigation. It's a step-by-step process of finding out an answer to a particular scientific problem. All right, so a scientific investigation has different components which you must know. Of course, this is not new. It's something that you've been doing from Form 1, even primary school. You will learn about scientific investigation and its stages. All right, so the first and foremost stage of a scientific investigation is called identifying a problem, right? You cannot solve a problem without a problem. So we need a problem which is scientific in nature, and then we try to solve it. So the first and foremost stage of a scientific problem is a scientific investigation is to identify a problem, right? So identifying a problem involves asking questions about the natural world, okay, your daily observations, all right? Examples include, for example, what causes rusting. Rusting, remember, rusting is the formation of an oxide on a metal, for example, iron, right? When you have an iron nail, place it in open air, expose it to air, you find that something is coats the metal, right? right? When you put the iron metal in the water, you find that the iron metal changes color. That's called rusting. So what causes it? So you carry out an investigation to find out really what the cause of rusting is. All right? Okay. Another one could be why plastics do not compose easily. That's also a scientific problem, right? So in order to find answers to this, you simply carry out an experiment, and then the experimental results will reveal what causes rusting and why plastics do not decompose easily. There are many examples we can give. All right, maybe you want to find out which salt would dissolve the fastest, like kitchen salt or table salt, which one of the two dissolve the quickest. So you carry out an experiment, you dissolve one type of salt, like kitchen salt, which has large particles, and then you record the time taken for it to dissolve. You also repeat the experiment with maybe the kitchen salt. Kitchen salt usually has larger particles, so you dissolve it and record the time taken for it to dissolve. You also repeat the experiment with table salt, and then you also record the time taken. So by the end of the day, you conclude which type of salt dissolves the quickest. Okay, that's basically, those are just examples, right? Those are just examples. Okay, all right. So the second stage is what is called the formulation of hypothesis. So having identified the having identified a problem there, okay, next you formulate a hypothesis. Right, you might recall that a hypothesis is just a guessed answer to a problem, right? So we're saying a hypothesis is formulated from the scientists' experiences and knowledge. Going back to the examples of problems like the causes of rusting. So you carry out an experiment. Let's say what causes rusting. Then you postulate or hypothesize. You say that okay, rusting is caused by oxygen based on experiences. Okay, you may say rusting is caused by, say, water, all right, or it's caused by salt. Okay, you can just postulate, and then you carry out an experiment to test these guesses, hypotheses. All right, so a hypothesis is just the answer that you have before you have carried out an experiment. We call it hypothesis from the word hypothesize. To hypothesize simply means to guess, to give a logical guess. All right, a reasonable guess. And also notice that the guess, the answer must be reasonable and testable. I think you learned that in Form 2 or Form 1. Okay, all right, so formulation of a hypothesis. You guess what could be the answer and before you carry out the experiment. All right, next stage is you have to experiment. All right, so that's experimentation. You would carry out an experiment to test the hypothesis, to prove the hypothesis. So experimentation is the next stage. I consider this to be the fourth stage. So an experiment is just a series of investigations which are intended to accept, modify, or reject hypotheses. Let's say that you hypothesized, you guessed that rusting is caused by oxygen. Okay, and then you carry out an experiment. Maybe you take some nails, expose them to air, and observe with time what happens to the color of the nail. Or you repeat the experiment by putting the nail in an environment where there's no air, like say maybe you put it in oil, cooking oil, and observe with time. Because there's no air in cooking oil, right, you repeat the experiment with a different other environments, and then by the end of the day you observe which nail changed color. If the color changed, if the nail changed color in an environment where there was oxygen, then you accept the guess that indeed rusting is caused by oxygen. All right, so when you expose iron to oxygen, color changes, which is called rusting. Okay. Sometimes you may have noticed that maybe the experiment does not support the guessed answer. In other words, what you find out in an experiment is totally different from what you guessed earlier on in the hypothesis. In that case, what do? You simply reject the hypothesis. It means the hypothesis is false. Okay, so you need to remodify your hypothesis. Remodify your hypothesis and redo the experiment probably, and then proceed until you find out the answer. Okay, that's very important to note. All right, so the fourth stage is observations and data collection. Right, so you have identified the problem in stage number 1, formulated the hypothesis, carried out an experiment. So as you carry out an experiment, what do? You make observations. You make observations. You have to make observations. Right, that's stage number 4. So you have to make observations. You have to make observations and also collect data. So as you carry out observations, as you carry out the experiment, you observe and record what you are observing. That's called data collection. All right. So this stage involves writing observations correctly. In this case, the observations can be color change. Okay, it can be maybe smell. It can be maybe formation of solid or precipitation, and any other things that you see in the experiment happening. Those are called your observations. All right, where you're carrying out measurements, you have to record correct units. All right, let's say you are maybe recording time in an experiment, time taken for a particular event to take place. Time in seconds should be recorded. All right, or maybe you are trying to investigate the length of let's say metal like magnesium added to an acid, for example. You have to indicate all those units of the measurements that you take. All right, so usually scientific data is collected using tables. So you're using tables, you record your data there. That's what you do in stage number 4. Stage number 5, you have to make sense out of the data that you have collected. That's called interpretation of data. All right, so the data, you look at the patterns, the trends in your data, and then you explain those trends. Okay, all right, so interpreting data means explaining the observations, giving meaning to the observations, attaching meaning to the observations. All right, and then you look for trends in relation to the aim of the experiment. Okay, let's say, for example, you're looking at the effect of say oxygen only, change of color of a metal, or rusting if per se. All right, so you observe with time, you look at what is going on, what is, if there's any color change, you observe what color changes. If maybe a particular reaction is producing bubbles, so you look at the intensity of the bubbles formed, and all that comes with the experiment you're carrying out needs to be interpreted. All right, exactly. Last but not least, you have to make a conclusion. All right, so you look at the trends and the results, you interpret accordingly, and then try to deduce to say, okay, this observation could be because of factor such. All right, so you make a conclusion. Now the conclusion must be attached to the hypothesis that is made. So we are saying the conclusion is drawn based upon the collected data. It is either either a confirmation of the or the rejection of the hypothesis under investigation. If the hypothesis is correct, it is confirmed and adopted, and if false, it is declared null and void, hence rejected. When the hypothesis is rejected, another one is formulated and tested. You don't give up. If the results don't support your hypothesis, it doesn't mean that you should throw away the experiment. No, you need to restructure the hypothesis and test again. All right, otherwise, this is what I wanted to share with you in this lesson. Wishing you the best. My name is Mr. Pochilola. Let's meet again in the next lesson, which is lesson number 3 on purity of a substance. Remember, all this is coming under the main topic, experimental techniques. Thank you very much. Wishing you all the best. Bye-bye.